Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's do some prayers. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhur Tatsavitravare Vargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat Asto Ma Satkamya Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya Mrityurma Amritam Gamya Om Sahnavavatu Sahnabhunaktu Saviryam Karvavahi Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahi Om Shanti 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 Om. Let's open our Uddhava Gita books, because that's what we study on Tuesdays. We are on chapter 22, and the title of this chapter is Gyan Yoga. And Lord Krishna, in a very elaborate way, explaining what Gyan Yoga is to Uddhava. Let's look at verse number 32. Tishthant yadi sma pashtyeh asad indriyartham nananumanen viruddham anyat na manyate vastuva manishani swapana yatho tathaye tirodhanam. Although a self-realized soul encounters material objects and activities which are temporary, he does not accept them as a reality. Just as a man awakening from sleep views his fading dream as an illusory manifestation of the mind. So that means that a realized person is also living in this world, dealing with the objects and the people, but remembering that this is not permanent. Okay? Although a self-realized soul is absorbed in Krishna consciousness, he must perform routine duties in relation to the material body, but he does not consider such activities as factual. Just as one has awakened from sleep, does not consider his dreams to be reality. While dreaming, one experiences various emotions, but when one awakens, he can understand that such feelings have no basis in reality. Similarly, one who is actually wise understands that the objects he experiences while awake and the activities he performs for the maintenance of his material body has no basis in ultimate reality, which exists apart from this temporary material manifestation. Indeed, the pleasures and pains of material existence are simply the result of being in the bodily concept of life, forgetting one's identity as pure spirit soul. For a self-realized soul, reality is his engagement in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord, which is distinct from the daydreams and night dreams of the conditioned souls. Let's look at verse number 33. Purvam grihitam gunkaram chitram agyanam atmanyehe aviviktam anga nivartate tat punar ikshayev na grihate na api visrijyehe atmaha. My dear Uddhava, material nascence, while expands into many varieties by the activities, is wrongly accepted by the conditioned soul to be the actual condition of the self. But through the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, this nascence fades away as one proceeds towards liberation. The eternal self is never wrongly accepted nor rejected at any stage, however. Knowledge is the destroyer of ignorance. All activities performed under the influence of the three modes of material nature during the conditional state of existence are born of ignorance, which we call avidya. Although illusory, such activities appear to be real to the conditioned soul. One should try to vanquish his ignorance by the cultivation of spiritual knowledge. Ignorance is only accepted due to lack of proper understanding, and so it is rejected when one becomes enlightened with the knowledge of the self, which is changeless and eternal. The visible objects of this world are always subject to transformation. The knowledge that is cultivated by a seer whose senses are imperfect is another side of ignorance. The pure spirit soul, on the other hand, is unchanging and without the four defects that are characteristic of conditional life. Whatever activities the conditioned soul performs under the direction of false ego, which is the creation of the modes of nature, have a foundation of ignorance. When spiritual knowledge is awakened, one regards his previous experiences as inconsequential. This is the symptom of self-realization. One should never mistakenly equate temporary material existence with liberated existence in the spiritual realm. It is only by identification with the temporary material body and subtle mind that one engages in the meaningless activities of sense gratification or artificial renunciation. Verse number 34. Yatha hi bhanor udhyo niri chakshush sham tame nihe jnana na tu sad vidyate evam samikshaha nipuna sati me hanyat tamnistaram purushasya buddhe. Just as when the sun rises, it destroys the darkness covering men's eyes, but it does not create the objects they perceive. So factual realization of me destroys the ignorance covering one's pure consciousness. One who is self-realized understands that the soul is not subject to material transformation. So that means the soul doesn't change. Only the Prakriti changes. It is changeless and eternal. Attributing material designations to the spirit soul is simply a result of ignorance. When the sun rises, the darkness covering one's eyes is removed so that one can see things as they are. Similarly, realization of the self dispels the darkness of ignorance, which covers his real knowledge. The contamination of an object is a temporary imposition. When the contamination is removed, the object displays its original purity. When one's intelligence is fully engaged in the service of the Supreme Lord, the propensities for material enjoyment and artificial renunciation leave his association. When one's contaminated material concept of life is vanquished, he regains his natural and healthy state of serving the Supreme Lord. Just as when the sun rises, one can see things as they are. Similarly, when the darkness of ignorance is dispelled by realization of the self, one can engage in his natural condition as the eternal servant of the Supreme Lord. Next verse, verse number 35. Esh swayam jyotir ajo prameyo mahanubhuti sakal anubhuti eko dvitiyo vaksham viramehe ye ne shitavag ashvascharanti. The Supreme Lord is luminous and immeasurable. So that means we cannot measure it. That's why it's called infinite. He is a pure transcendental consciousness, all-pervading knowledge, and one without a second. He is realized only after ordinary words cease. So that means language cannot describe it. By him, the power of speech and the life years are set into motion. The super soul is compared to the sun, whereas the individual souls are compared to the rays of the sun. The distinction between the super soul and the innumerable spirit souls is being described in this verse. The super soul is self-manifest and self-effulgent, but the living entities are manifested by him. The Lord is unborn, but the living entities become subject to material designations. The Lord is immeasurable or all-pervading, whereas the living entities are localized. The super soul is the supreme spirit whole, and the living entities are his minute parts and parcels. He is omniscient, whereas the living entity is only aware of his limited experience. The Supreme Soul is one, whereas the living entities are many. Any description of the Supreme Lord is beyond the power of the words of the conditioned souls. It is said in the Vedas, Yato vacho nirvartantehe aprapyaha manasaha saha. The descriptive power of speech fails in the realm of the supreme truth, and the speculative power of the mind cannot achieve him. So that's why in English it's often said to define God is to defile God. So we cannot define God. The Supreme Lord is unborn, beyond the range of the material senses, fully spiritual, not bound by time, space, or circumstances, omniscient, and one without a second. When the limit of one's speech is attained, within this world, the Supreme Lord remains far beyond reach. Rather, by the influence of the Supreme Lord, the power of speech comes to life. It is the Lord who awards the power of the senses to the conditioned souls, and when he desires, that power is withdrawn. The relationship of the independent Lord with the minute living entities is technically called Swajatiya Bhed. The living entity's relationship with the material nature is technically called Vijatiya Bhed. The Lord's relationship with the spiritual nature is termed Swagat Bhed. Being influenced by the external energy of the Lord, there is confusion in the minds of the Mayavadis regarding Swagat Bhed, Swajatiya Bhed, and the Vijatiya Bhed. The enlightened view of these words is that they establish the supremacy of the Lord, whereas the unenlightened view misconstrues a meaning that there is an existence separate from the Supreme Lord. So we cannot live without that higher power. Verse number 36. एतावान आत्म समोहो यद विकल्पस तु केवले आत्मन ऋते स्वम आत्मनम अवलंबो न यस्येहि. Whatever duality appears to be applicable to the self is simply a manifestation of the mind's bewilderment. There is no factual basis of such duality except the fact that it is imagined by the conditioned souls. One may question, how can the super soul be one without a second when we can directly see that this visible world is separate from him? The answer is there is no duality present in the soul. And so, what to speak of the Supreme Soul? Whatever is perceived as being separate from the Lord is not because everything in existence is the Lord and his energies. The perception of duality is simply due to a state of delusion within the mind. That the super soul is one without a second is stated in the Vedas. Na manasihi kinchan. Besides this, nothing exists. The soul is pure spiritual existence without any tinge of matter. After comprehending the illusory nature of material variegatedness, one should not foolishly conclude that there is no difference between the minute souls and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord is always in a superior position, and the living entities are eternally subordinate. The soul is naturally free from material association, but by misuse of his minute independence, he becomes conditioned by Maya. Transcendental reality has nothing to do with material variegatedness. It is most unreasonable to try to attribute the characteristics of this material world to the Lord's eternal characteristics and pastimes. The conceptions of duality that is born from the deluded mind of the conditioned soul can never cover the effulgent glory of spiritual variegatedness. Verse number 37. Yan namaha kritibhir griham panchvarnam abadhitam vyarthe napyehe artho vado yam dvayam pandit maninam. The duality that is applied to the five gross material elements is understood by their names and forms. Those who claim that such a dualistic conception is reality are mundane scholars who proudly put forward their theories without actual realization of the truth. Cotton is the cause of cloth, and the cloth is the effect of cotton. Cloth could not exist without the existence of cotton. No genuinely learned man could fail to understand this. This visible world of names and forms, composed of the five gross elements, is perceivable by the material senses. All such manifestations have a beginning and an end, and so are not ultimate reality. The Supreme Personality of Godhead had previously stated in this chapter, by direct perception, logical deduction, scriptural authority, and personal realization, one should know that this world has a beginning and an end, and so is not the ultimate reality. Thus, one should live in this world without attachment. So, ultimate reality is the same in the past, in the present, and in the future. And we know that Prakriti keeps on changing. So that is not the ultimate reality. So constant changes in there. Material names and forms having a beginning and an end have no permanent existence and so do not constitute essential reality. This cosmic manifestation is a transformation of one of the energies of the Supreme Lord. The Lord is the absolute truth, and his potencies are also truth. But the names and forms that are temporarily manifested in this material world have no eternal existence. There are two kinds of pseudo scholars: those who accept matter as ultimate reality, and those who imagine spirit to be devoid of variegatedness. Neither group accepts the transcendental pastimes of the Supreme Lord, so they are not fit to be addressed as actual learned. The cultivation of knowledge devoid of the service of the Supreme Lord, who is beyond the reach of mundane sense perception, is the only asset of such pseudo scholars. Verse number 38. Yoginoho pakva yogasya yunjitaha kaya utthate up sager vihanyet tatrayam vihito viti. The physical body of a neophyte yogi who has not yet achieved maturity in his practice may sometimes be afflicted by various disturbances such as disease. For them, the following process is recommended. After outlining the process of Jnana Yoga, the Lord herein gives instructions to those who are disturbed by disease or other impediments. Yogis who are still on the material platform due to incomplete realization are given some suggestions by the Lord in this regard. Often, Hatha yogis and Raj yogis who disregard devotional service to the Lord cannot complete their yoga practice due to remaining in the bodily conception of the life. The process of devotional service to the Lord, which is the constitutional duty of the soul, has been prescribed to elevate such imperfect yogis to the transcendental platform. Okay, so Hatha Yoga, Raj Yoga, we know they are for the body and the mind, and we live in the body and the mind. So while on this journey, we got to make sure that we keep those layers of our personality healthy too. So that's why those are the branches of yoga. Verse number 39. Yog dharneha kamshit asne dharan anvitahe tapo mantra aushadhai kanshit upsarga na vi nirdahet. Some disturbances such as heat and cold can be counteracted by meditating on the sun and the moon. That is like a sun nadi and the moon nadi, Hatha Yoga. Illnesses such as gastric disorders can be restrained by practicing sitting postures and breath control. Performance of penance, chanting of mantras, and the application of medicinal herbs can counteract inauspicious planetary positions, fear of snake bite, and so on. So disturbances from outside also, he says that we can heal them with certain techniques. By practicing yoga and meditating on the sun and the moon, one can get relief from the miseries caused by excessive heat and cold. By practicing asanas and pranayam, one can cure gastric ailments. By the performance of penance, the chanting of mantras, and ingestion of medicinal herbs, one can neutralize inauspiciousness caused by planetary positions and the threat of snake bites. For the removal of obstacles on the path of Karma Yoga and Hatha Yoga, various practices have been advised. Such remedial measures are only for those who are not surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Verse number 40. Kanshin mam anu dhyanen nam sangirtan adibhi yogeshwar anuvrityaha vahanyad ashubh dan shanai. One can destroy disturbances such as lust by always thinking of me and by congregationally chanting my holy names. One can destroy the obstacles of pride and false ego by following in the footsteps of the masters of mystic yoga. One should overcome lust by meditating on the Supreme Lord. One should subdue his pride by following in the footsteps of great souls. By engaging in the practice of devotional service to the Supreme Lord, beginning with hearing and chanting the Lord's holy names, and meditating upon his transcendental pastimes, all inauspiciousness within the heart, which are impediments to one's advancement, will gradually diminish. So first we have to know the goal. Then we are on the path that there are techniques to remove the obstacles. And it's up to us to remove the obstacles. It could be physical, mental, emotional, any kind of an obstacle. So that's what he's talking about over here. Verse number 41. Kechit deham hamam dhira sukalpam veyos stiram vidhaye vividhopayer ath yunjati siddhya. There are methods by which yogis can remain free from disease and keep themselves in a youthful condition of life without experiencing the distresses of old age. Thus, they practice yoga for the purpose of achieving mystic perfections. Some yogis employ various methods to keep their body fit and youthful, desiring to attain mystic perfections. They try to master the mystic perfection of entering another's body so that they can utilize it for sense enjoyment. Such practices are not to be accepted as devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So we got to see that when we are attaining those powers, those vibhutis which Rishi Patanjali talked about, can we keep in mind that our goal is oneness with God or not? We got to see that. Because it's very easy to slip, especially when those powers start to manifest. The practice of Hatha Yoga is generally accepted with a desire to attain the 18 kinds of mystic perfection. Such practices cannot be counted as limbs of devotional service. So we got to be alert not to fall prey to those powers. Verse number 42. Na hi tat kushlaha dhrityam tad ayaso hi aparthakaha ant vatvach kushirasya he falasyev vanaspatya. Learned persons who are expert in transcendental knowledge do not very highly value these mystic perfections because the soul, like a tree, is permanent and the body, like the tree's fruit, is perishable. Those who have actually realized the eternal nature of the self are not tempted by the allurements that mystic powers offer. The spirit soul is permanent, like a tree that may live for a very long time, but the material body is soon to perish, like the fruit of the tree that quickly spoils. A tree produces seasonal fruits, but even after the fruit is gone, the tree remains for a very long time. Self-realized souls, knowing perfectly well that the gross and subtle bodies, which are temporary manifestations of material nature, are perishable, do not undergo the severe penance required to obtain mystic powers. So just like Lord Krishna, Rishi Patanjali warned us in the Yoga Sutras, Lord Krishna is warning us too in this chapter. Do not go after the mystic powers, even though they sound wonderful. Couple of more verses in this chapter. 43. Yogam nishevataho nityam kayaschet kalpatamiyat tach shrichyan namatiman yogam utsrijye matvara. Although the physical body may be improved by the practice of yoga, an intelligent person who has dedicated his life to me does not place his faith in such a prospect and in fact shuns such practices. Even if there is the prospect of achieving a duration of life of one kalpa by the practice of mystic yoga, an intelligent person will not place his faith in such a thing, but rather dedicate himself to Lord Krishna's devotional service. Although in the scriptures there are recommendations for the performance of Hatha Yoga, Raj Yoga, and Pranayama, ultimately it is advised that one become freed from all types of material bondage by faithfully worshipping the Supreme Lord in the association of devotees. The devotees of the Supreme Lord cannot place their faith in any process for overcoming lust, anger, and so on, other than devotional service to Lord Mukund. In this connection, one should consider this verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. O Vyasdeva, you are freed from all sins. Thus, I have explained my birth and activities for self realization. As you asked, all this will be conducive for your personal satisfaction also. So, again and again, he's telling us that ultimate goal is to become one with him. Do not think that means are the goal. To keep this body healthy, body is a means. Sure, we need a healthy body. But if we make that as a goal, then we are fooling ourselves. No matter how healthy a body is, how strong a body is, there is a limit to this body. Okay? So definitely we got to take care of it, but keeping in mind that ultimate goal is to love God and only God. Let's look at the last verse of this chapter. Yog charyam mam yogi vicharan mad apashriha na antaraye vihanyet nispriha swasukh anubhu. My unalloyed devotee is without material hankering because he is satisfied within the self and thus experiences unlimited happiness. Thus, while executing this process of yoga, he is never deterred by impediments. Although the followers of Hatha Yoga and Raj Yoga make some progress in their respective practices, they generally fail to gain success because they are confronted by numerous obstacles. However, one who surrenders to the Supreme Lord, who is the transcendental Cupid, will certainly come out victorious on his path back home, back to Godhead. So that's why I always tell you that when we do the Hatha Yoga also, people want to do more and more asanas. Sure, do them, but make sure that your mind is connected with the God internally. That is advanced yoga. We start out with the bodily identification that we want to keep this body healthy. Then little bit higher is intermediate level is when we can connect our mind with the energy which is flowing. But ultimately we got to just let the body do what it's doing, it's supposed to do, stretch, move, bend, forward, backward, even during Hatha Yoga, but connect our mind with the God within. That is the advanced yoga, if we can do that. Not just the Shirshasana and the Padmasana or Utthit Padmasana or any other hard asana. No, that is just for the body, but the mind we got to connect. So this was the end of this chapter. So now next week we'll start the Bhakti Yoga chapter. And that is the last chapter of this great book, Uddhava Gita. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.